Imagine walking into a luxury restaurant, exhausted from your long shift, only to hear wealthy men laughing at you, mocking you in a language they think you don't understand. Now imagine the look on their faces when you respond fluently in that very same language. Tonight, you'll hear the unbelievable story of a young black waitress who silenced a billionaire with just one sentence, "Stop talking in Arabic. She won't understand you." Those were the careless words that slipped from the billionaire's mouth, followed by cruel laughter from his table of wealthy friends. They thought they were invisible, untouchable, and clever for mocking a young waitress in a language they assumed was far beyond her reach. What they didn't know was that their arrogance was about to backfire in a way none of them could have imagined. But let's slow down and set the scene. It was a Friday evening in one of the city's most luxurious restaurants. The kind of place where crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors, with the sound of clinking wine glasses blended with the soft hum of a live piano in the corner. The air carried the aroma of truffle pasta, seared steak, and imported wines that most people could never dream of affording. The customers here weren't ordinary people. They were CEOs, celebrities, politicians, and yes, billionaires. For the wait staff, serving here wasn't just a job. It was survival. One mistake could cost them their paycheck, their reputation, or even their position. And for Amina, a young black waitress with dreams far bigger than her current life, every night was a tightrope walk. She carried herself with quiet dignity, balancing heavy trays and endless requests while keeping a polite smile on her face. But inside, she was exhausted. She had worked 12 hours already. Her feet ached, and she hadn't even had time to eat. Still, she pushed through, because she wasn't working just for herself. Amina had a little brother waiting at home. He was only 12, and since their parents had passed away, she had become both mother and father to him. Every dollar she earned went toward his school fees, groceries, and a small savings jar they kept in their kitchen labeled college dreams. Some nights, when she was too tired to speak, she would look at that jar and remind herself why she couldn't give up. But tonight, Amina's patience would be tested in a way she never saw coming. Just as she was collecting dishes from a corner booth, a hush fell over the restaurant. Heads turned. The atmosphere shifted. That's when he walked in, the billionaire. Everyone knew him. His face was on magazine covers. His name flashed across business news channels, and his reputation for arrogance preceded him. He had more money than entire neighborhoods combined, and he wore it like a crown. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a gold watch glinting on his wrist, he walked in surrounded by his entourage, investors, lawyers, and friends who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. The staff stiffened. They all knew what serving him meant. Long, drawn-out orders, snide remarks, and absolutely no room for mistakes. And tonight, fate decided that Amina would be the one to take his table. She straightened her apron, tucked a loose curl behind her ear, and forced a smile. No matter how rude he might be, she told herself, she had to stay professional. The manager's eyes were already on her, making sure she handled him with perfection. Amina approached the table with a tray of menus, her voice calm but warm. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome. Can I start you off with some drinks?" The billionaire didn't even glance at her at first. He waved a dismissive hand, continuing his conversation with a man beside him in Arabic. His voice was low, but not low enough. Amina's ears caught every word. "Look at her hands," he sneered in Arabic, gesturing toward her. "Clumsy. She can barely hold the tray. People like this should be scrubbing floors, not serving my wine." The men around him chuckled, hiding their laughter behind expensive glasses of champagne. To them, it was entertainment. To Amina, it was humiliation. But she didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, slam down the menus, or storm away like she wanted to. She simply placed the menus in front of them, her movements graceful, her expression unreadable. On the outside, she was just another waitress doing her job. On the inside, her heart pounded with a mixture of anger and something else, resolve. Because what the billionaire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amina had a secret that had been years in the making. You see, while she worked these long shifts, while she balanced school and responsibilities, she had also been teaching herself languages. She had always been fascinated by them. French, Spanish, Mandarin. She devoured books and free lessons online. Every new word felt like unlocking a door to a different world. And Arabic, that had been her greatest challenge, but also her proudest achievement. She didn't just know it, she was fluent. So as the billionaire laughed, assuming she was blind to his words, Amina understood every cruel syllable. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. Should she stay silent? Should she protect her job by pretending she hadn't heard? Or should she do the unthinkable? Answer him back in the very language he had used to belittle her? Her hands tightened slightly on the tray. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was more than just about her. This was about dignity. About showing that no amount of money or arrogance gave anyone the right to strip someone else of their humanity. The piano in the background seemed to fade. The laughter at the other tables blurred into white noise. All Amina could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat and the mocking voice of the billionaire who thought she was invisible. She looked at him, really looked at him. This man so used to commanding power and respect, yet so quick to use his privilege as a weapon against those who serve him. And in that moment, she made her choice. What she said next would stop the entire restaurant cold. The night wound down, the clinking of cutlery and soft piano notes fading into a lull as the last guest prepared to leave. Amina carried her final tray back into the kitchen, but unlike other nights, she wasn't weighed down by exhaustion. Instead, her mind spun with possibility. The business card in her apron pocket seemed to radiate with energy, as though it pulsed with a promise of change. She slipped into the break room for a brief moment of quiet. Pulling the card from her pocket, she studied the crisp lettering. The silver-haired investor's name gleamed, followed by his foundation's logo. A real opportunity. A doorway to something beyond restaurant walls and late-night shifts. But alongside hope, fear crept in. Could I really do this? What if I fail? What if I'm not ready? She thought of Jamal, his wide smile, his dreams of college, the way he looked up to her like she was unshakable. A tear pricked the corner of her eye. I can't let him down. But maybe this is how I finally give him the life he deserves. She closed her eyes and whispered prayer, part plea, part gratitude, for strength, for clarity, for courage. When she stepped out of the break room, Maria was waiting, her arms crossed with a mischievous grin. Well, don't keep me in suspense. What did that fancy investor want? Amina smiled faintly, holding the card to her chest. He offered me a chance. Something bigger than this. Something I never thought I'd have. Maria squealed softly, pulling her into a hug. I knew it. Girl, this is your moment. Don't doubt it for a second. Amina laughed through her nerves, hugging her friend back. For the first time in a long time, laughter didn't feel forced. It felt free. Meanwhile, at table 9, the billionaire finally rose to leave, his companions following reluctantly. His face was stiff, his pride shattered. He left without a word, not even glancing at Amina. But it didn't matter. His silence was its own admission of defeat. The silver-haired investor, however, lingered for just a moment. As he walked past the bar, he tipped his head respectfully toward Amina. I'll be expecting your call, he said warmly before disappearing through the restaurant doors. And just like that, he was gone. But the promise he left behind remained. Later that night, as Amina walked home under the glow of street lamps, the cool night air wrapped around her like a cloak of possibility. She thought about her journey. The struggles, the insults, the long nights carrying trays while others carried dreams. And then she thought about her mother's words. When you do answer, make sure they never forget it. Tonight, she had answered, and they would never forget it. When she finally pushed open the door to their small apartment, Jamal was waiting, sprawled on the couch with a textbook open on his lap. He looked up eagerly. How was work, sis? Amina smiled softly, brushing his curls with her hand. Work was different. Something happened tonight. Something that might change everything for us. Jamal's eyes lit up. Change? Like how? She pulled out the business card, placing it gently in his hand. His jaw dropped as he read it. No way. Are you serious? He wants to work with you. She nodded, her smile growing. With us, Jamal. Because whatever I do, it's for both of us. He jumped up, wrapping his arms around her in the tightest hug. You're amazing, sis. I always knew it. And in that embrace, Amina felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by something stronger, certainty. This wasn't the end of her story. It was a beginning. She would call the investor. She would take the risk. She would step into the unknown, not just for herself, but for Jamal, for her mother's memory, and for every moment she had ever been underestimated. The billionaire's mockery had tried to reduce her to nothing. Instead, it had revealed her power. And now, Amina was ready to claim her future, and that's how a billionaire mocking a young black waitress in Arabic backfired spectacularly. What started as an insult turned into the opportunity of a lifetime. This story shows us something powerful. Dignity is priceless. Courage opens doors, and sometimes the people who try to break you end up being the reason you rise. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily videos. We've got more inspiring stories coming your way. Stories that will make you believe in the power of respect, resilience, and standing tall. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Consequences and opportunity. The restaurant buzzed with low chatter and clinking silverware, but for Amina, every sound seemed muted. She stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with trembling hands, trying to steady her racing thoughts. On the surface, she looked composed, but inside, questions crashed into each other like waves in a storm. What if he complains? What if management fires me? What if this ruins everything I've worked for? Her pride told her she had done the right thing. Her dignity felt restored, her spirit unbroken. But survival whispered another truth. Sometimes the right thing came with consequences she couldn't afford. She glanced at the clock. Only 2 more hours of her shift left. 2 hours to survive without being called into the manager's office, without seeing the billionaire rise from his chair and demand her dismissal. Her heart jumped when she saw Mr. Lewis, the restaurant manager, making his way across the floor. His expression was unreadable. Tight lips, furrowed brow, eyes sharp. Here it comes, Amina muttered under her breath, bracing herself. Mr. Lewis stopped in front of her, cleared his throat, and said in a low voice, "My office. Now." The tray in her hand suddenly felt heavier. Maria, standing a few feet away, gave her a wide-eyed look of sympathy. Amina followed him down the narrow hallway past the kitchen. The clatter of pots and sizzling pans couldn't drown out the pounding of her heart. When they entered his office, Mr. Lewis closed the door behind them. He turned slowly, fixing her with a stern gaze. "What happened out there?" Amina swallowed hard. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "He was mocking me. In Arabic. I just couldn't stay silent anymore." Mr. Lewis crossed his arms. "Do you realize who that man is? He's one of the wealthiest clients this restaurant has ever hosted. If he takes offense, we could lose not just him, but half the business partners he brings in." Amina's stomach sank. "So that's it? I'm fired." The word hung in the air like a noose. But then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Lewis sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His sternness softened. "No, Amina, you're not fired." Her eyes widened. He continued, "In all my years running this place, I've never seen a server command a table the way you just did. Do you know what I saw out there? Respect. From every corner of the room. Even some of his own companions looked impressed. The truth is," he paused, almost reluctant to say it, "you made this restaurant look stronger tonight, not weaker." Relief washed over Amina, so powerful, she almost collapsed into the chair beside her. But before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. The assistant manager cracked it open, her face pale. "Mr. Lewis, that silver-haired gentleman at table 9. He's asking for Amina." Amina's breath caught. "Me?" Mr. Lewis raised an eyebrow. "Yes, you. He specifically asked for you." For a split second, panic surged again. Was this it? Was he going to reprimand her on behalf of the billionaire? But then she remembered the faint smile he had given her earlier. There was something different about him, something measured. Mr. Lewis gestured toward the door. Well, don't keep him waiting. Her legs felt like lead as she walked back across the floor, every step heavy with anticipation. The billionaire sat stiffly at the table, his gaze fixed on his plate, clearly refusing to acknowledge her existence. But the silver-haired investor turned in his chair, his eyes warm and curious. When Amina reached them, he smiled politely. "Miss, may I have a word with you?" Her voice was steady despite the storm inside her. "Of course, sir." He gestured to an empty chair. "Sit." She hesitated. Waitresses didn't sit at clients' tables. It broke every unspoken rule of service. But something in his tone wasn't a request. It was an invitation, one she couldn't refuse. Carefully, she sat down, her back straight, hands folded nervously in her lap. The investor leaned forward. "You handled yourself brilliantly tonight. Most people, when mocked in front of others, would lash out, shout, 'cause of scene. But you waited. You chose the perfect moment. And when you spoke, you didn't just offend yourself, you commanded respect." Heat rushed to her cheeks, though she kept her composure. "Thank you, sir. I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing." He chuckled softly. "Oh, you did. And for the record, your Arabic? Flawless. Where did you learn?" "My mother," Amina answered. Her voice softened. "She taught me as a child. She always said knowledge is power, even if the world doesn't recognize it right away." The investor's eyes glimmered. Wise woman. And clearly, she raised a wise daughter. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, still refusing to meet Amina's eyes. His silence was louder than any insult he could have thrown. The investor lowered his voice. "I'll be frank with you, miss." "Amina," she supplied. "Amina," he repeated with a nod. "You don't belong behind a tray. Not forever. You've got presence, intelligence, composure. These are qualities leaders are made of." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Then, the words that followed nearly knocked the air out of her lungs. "I run an international foundation. We look for multilingual talents with cultural awareness. People who can bridge divides others can't. You'd be a perfect fit. If you're interested, I'd like to interview you myself." Amina blinked, her mind spinning. Did he just offer me a chance at a real career? She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The investor smiled knowingly. "Don't answer now. Think about it. But know this, sometimes opportunities come disguised as confrontations. And tonight, you proved you're ready for more than serving tables." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek business card, and slid it across the table. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The letters gleamed under the restaurant lights. His name, his title, his direct number. It was real. Her chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The billionaire shifted again, glaring at the investor, but still said nothing. For once, his money couldn't save him. The spotlight wasn't on him anymore. It was on her. Amina rose slowly, bowed her head in respect. "Thank you, sir. I'll think about it." He nodded. "Do. And when you're ready, call me." She tucked the card safely into her apron, her heart pounding with excitement and fear all at once. She walked back toward the bar, Maria's curious eyes following her. And though the billionaire still sat in silence, stewing in his humiliation, Amina knew one thing for certain. This night hadn't ruined her life. It had just opened the door to a future she had never dared to imagine. The consequences had been real, but so was the opportunity. The reaction. The sound of Amina's words still lingered in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Even though the pianist had resumed playing, even though waiters bustled past with trays of food and drink, everyone at table 9 remained frozen in the aftershock. Amina herself walked away slowly, her tray balanced against her arm, her back straight. She didn't look over her shoulder, didn't need to. She knew the ripple she had caused was spreading wider with every second. At the table, the billionaire's face burned a deeper shade of red than the wine in his glass. His jaw tightened as he struggled to find words, but every syllable he tried to form died before it left his tongue. For a man who lived on power and control, silence was his worst defeat. The younger men at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They stared down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by the arrangement of garnishes on their appetizers. Not one of them dared meet Amina's eyes as she walked away. The laughter that had come so easily minutes ago now tasted bitter in their throats. It was a silver-haired investor who broke the heavy quiet. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands neatly on the table, and spoke softly in Arabic. "Well, gentlemen, it seems we've just been given a lesson in humility. And I, for one, am grateful for it." A smirk tugged at his lips, subtle but undeniable. He was enjoying this, watching the mighty billionaire squirm under the weight of his own arrogance. The lawyer cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. She's extraordinary," he admitted reluctantly, his voice carrying just enough awe to sting the billionaire's pride. "Her Arabic is better than mine. Perfect, really." Another man at the table gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. "We mocked her, and she understood every word. Imagine the patience it took not to respond sooner." His tone carried admiration, though laced with guilt. The billionaire slammed his glass down harder than necessary, the sharp clink startling even his companions. "Enough," he snapped in English, his voice low but laced with venom. "She's just a waitress." The silver-haired investor's eyes glinted, and yet in 5 seconds she commanded more respect than you have all evening. The jab cut deep. The billionaire's nostrils flared, his hands gripping the tablecloth as though it might anchor him against a tide of shame threatening to pull him under. But he didn't reply. He couldn't, because deep down he knew the truth. He had underestimated her. He had thought his wealth and language gave him superiority. Instead, his ignorance had exposed him. Meanwhile, whispers had spread across the restaurant like wildfire. Diners leaned across tables, murmuring, "Did you hear what she said? She spoke Arabic like a queen. That man's face priceless." Phones were subtly pulled out, though most were too afraid to record openly. Still, the energy in the room had shifted. Every customer now looked at Amina differently, not as a server blending into the background, but as someone remarkable. At the bar, Amina set down her tray with a soft sigh. Her hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Her heart still raced, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was exhilaration. She had done it, but with the rush came worry. Had she gone too far? Would management fire her? Would the billionaire demand her job as revenge? She pressed a hand lightly against her apron, grounding herself. No matter what happened next, she knew one thing. She had defended her dignity, and that was worth everything. Across the room, her co-worker Maria slipped up beside her. Wide-eyed, Maria whispered, "Girl, did you just speak Arabic to them?" Amina nodded slowly, lips curving into the faintest smile. Maria's jaw dropped. That was incredible. You should have seen his face. He looked like someone pulled a rug right out from under him. She stifled a laugh, covering her mouth. "You're a legend now." Amina chuckled softly, shaking her head, "or unemployed by tomorrow morning." But Maria shook her head firmly. "No way. Everyone saw what happened. Even if management tried to fire you, people would riot. That investor guy looked like he respected you more than anyone at that table." And Maria was right. Back at table 9, the silver-haired investor wasn't done. He leaned closer to the billionaire, speaking low enough for only their group to hear. "You know, respect isn't bought with money. It's earned. And tonight, she earned more respect than you could with all your wealth combined." The billionaire's lips pressed into a thin line. He had no comeback, no witty remark. The silence that followed only deepened his humiliation. The other men avoided looking at him altogether, their loyalty shifting subtly toward the investor. For the rest of the night, the balance of power at that table had changed, and Amina had been the one to tip the scales. Meanwhile, the restaurant's manager, Mr. Lewis, had been watching everything from the corner. He had seen the exchange, heard the whispers, and studied the reactions. His first instinct had been panic. What if this escalates? What if the billionaire causes trouble? But now, seeing the tide of admiration for Amina, he realized something else. His waitress hadn't embarrassed the restaurant. She had elevated it. Customers would talk about this night for weeks. maybe months, and all because of Amina. Still, he knew he would have to address it later. For now, he stayed back, letting the moment play out. At the bar, Amina finally exhaled fully, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that evening. She looked toward the entrance of the restaurant, where the night air spilled in each time the door opened, and thought of Jamal. If only he could have seen that. She imagined telling him later, his eyes going wide with pride. "You spoke Arabic to a billionaire, and you won." He'd laugh, clap his hands, maybe even tell his friends at school. The thought warmed her heart. Yes, she had taken a risk. But for once, it felt like the risk had been worth it. Because in that moment, the reaction wasn't just laughter dying or whispers spreading. The reaction was something bigger. Something that would follow her long after she clocked out that night. She had proven that respect is earned not by money, but by character. And though the billionaire's pride was shattered, Amina's spirit had never shone brighter. The reaction was clear. The room would never forget her. The turning point. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass like he owned the air around him. His smirk widened as he whispered another jab in Arabic, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Imagine," he chuckled to his friends, "she goes home to a little shack, bragging about how she served kings tonight. And we laugh, and she never knows." Laughter rippled around the table again. Heads tilted back. Teeth flashed. Their mockery grew bolder by the second, feeding on her silence. But the silence was about to end. Amina placed the last appetizer on the table with careful grace. She straightened her back, tucked the tray under her arm, and locked her eyes on the billionaire. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but her face showed only calm determination. She drew in a breath, so quiet no one noticed. And then, in flawless, steady Arabic, her voice cut to the air like a blade. "Perhaps you should treat people with respect. After all, money can buy many things, but it cannot buy manners." The words didn't just land, they exploded. The table froze. The laughter died mid-breath, caught in throats. Forks clinked softly against porcelain as men dropped them without thinking. A glass wobbled dangerously before its owner steadied it with trembling fingers. The billionaire's smirk collapsed into shock. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened, and for the first time that night, he looked directly at Amina, not as a servant, not as furniture, but as a human being who had just shattered his illusion of control. The silence spread beyond the table. Conversations from nearby diners faltered. Even the pianist's fingers seemed to hover above the keys, pausing in disbelief at the sudden shift in the room. It was as though time itself had stopped to witness the moment. The younger men at the table blinked at her, mouths slightly open, their arrogance melting into embarrassment. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie, avoiding her gaze. And the silver-haired investor, the one who had sent something earlier, leaned forward, his lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile, as if to say, "Finally." But all eyes were on the billionaire. His face flushed red. He opened his mouth to speak, to regain control, but no words came out. For once, the man who always had something to say was speechless. Amina didn't look away. Her gaze was steady, her posture proud. She didn't shout, didn't sneer, didn't show anger. She simply stood there, her words echoing in the silence like a lesson carved into stone. The beauty of it wasn't just the Arabic itself. It was how perfectly she had delivered it. Her accent was sharp, her tone flawless, her command of the language undeniable. She hadn't just understood his insults. She had mastered the very tool he thought made him untouchable. Finally, one of the investors broke the silence. He let out a low whistle and muttered in Arabic, "She speaks better than you do." A chuckle followed from another man at the table, nervous but genuine, and suddenly the billionaire's humiliation deepened. His own allies were turning the moment against him. The restaurant was alive again now, but not with laughter. It buzzed with whispers. Diners leaned toward each other, murmuring about the waitress who had just put a billionaire in his place. Heads tilted, eyes widened, admiration flickered. And through it all, Amina stood tall. Inside, her chest pounded. Her palms were damp with sweat. A part of her screamed, "What did you just do? You could lose your job." But another, louder voice whispered back, "No, this was the right thing." This was your moment. The billionaire finally found his voice, though it trembled with anger. You speak Arabic? He sputtered. Amina tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. Clearly, she replied in the same flawless Arabic, her tone polite but firm. His mouth opened again, but no words came. What could he say? Every insult he had thrown, every laugh he had shared, was now turned against him. For once, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. The silver-haired investor clapped his hands softly, breaking the tension. Well said, he murmured, still in Arabic. His eyes met Amina's. Full respect. Very well said. A ripple of approval spread through the table, quiet but unmistakable. The power dynamic had shifted. Amina, the waitress they had mocked, had just commanded the respect of billionaires and investors alike, without raising her voice, without breaking her composure, without losing her dignity. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the kind measured in money or status, but the kind that came from knowledge, from resilience, from refusing to be silenced. The billionaire sat back in his chair, defeated. His hands tightened around the stem of his wine glass, but he said nothing more. He knew anything he said now would only dig him deeper into shame. The restaurant slowly returned to life around them, the piano resuming, conversations picking up again. But something had shifted permanently. Everyone who had witnessed the moment carried it with them. They would remember the young black waitress who silenced arrogance with elegance. Amina gathered her tray, bowed her head politely, and turned to walk away. Her legs trembled as she moved, but her spirit soared. She had done it. She had stood her ground. Behind her, the silver-haired investor leaned toward the billionaire and whispered, "You might have the money, but she is something you'll never buy." The billionaire said nothing. He simply stared at his untouched plate, his arrogance dissolved into silence. And Amina, she walked back to the bar, her chin a little higher, her smile a little brighter. She didn't just serve tables that night. She served a lesson. The turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Amina holds back. The laughter at table 9 buzzed in Amina's ears like static. Cool, dismissive, cutting. She had heard every word, and yet she had said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she stood by the bar, tray pressed lightly against her hip, breathing slow and deep, like a boxer in the ring waiting for the right moment to throw the first punch. Outwardly, she looked calm, professional even. Her co-workers probably thought she was just waiting for the next order. But inside, she was wrestling with a storm. Her hands ached from holding the tray so tightly. Her jaw hurt from clenching her teeth. Part of her wanted to march back to that table, slam her palm down, and unleash the truth in Arabic, word for word, until the billionaire's smug face crumbled. But another part of her whispered caution. What about Jamal? What about rent? What about the jar labeled college dreams? If she lost this job, it wouldn't just be her who suffered. It would be her little brother, too. She couldn't risk his future for one moment of satisfaction. And yet, what about her dignity? Wasn't that worth something? How many times could she swallow insults before they poisoned her spirit completely? How many times could she let people walk over her before she stopped recognizing herself in the mirror? Her mind felt like a battlefield. Pride on one side, survival on the other. She remembered her mother's voice, soft but firm, echoing her memory. Silence is strength. Amina, not every insult deserves an answer, but when you do answer, make sure they never forget it. Those words grounded her. Her mother had been a quiet woman, never flashy, never loud, but strong in a way people didn't always notice until it was too late. Amina had inherited that same quiet strength. So she waited. She carried out her tasks with precision, refilling water at other tables, clearing empty plates, and checking in with guests. She smiled when needed, nodded politely, and moved like a shadow through the golden glow of the restaurant. But her eyes kept darting back to table 9. The billionaire hadn't stopped. He leaned closer to his friends, his Arabic rolling smoothly as he tossed out one insult after another. She looks like she's serving us leftovers from her own kitchen. Do you think she's ever eaten in a place like this? Probably not. She probably can't even pronounce half the dishes. People like her should be grateful. This is the closest they'll ever get to wealth. Each sentence landed like a slap. Each laugh from his friends echoed like a chorus of mockery. And still, Amina held back. But she wasn't silent out of fear anymore. No, she was silent because she understood something they didn't. Power lies not in reacting instantly, but in choosing the perfect moment to reveal what you're capable of. She wasn't going to waste her words while he thought he was winning. She was going to let him build his arrogance higher and higher, so that when she struck, the fall would be harder, the silence afterward deeper. A customer at another table called her over. "Excuse me, miss, could we get another bottle of the house red?" Amina smiled warmly, nodding. "Of course, right away." Her voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the fire burning inside her. She fetched the bottle, uncorked it smoothly, and poured the wine with elegance. The couple thanked her, and she moved on. She was in control. She knew the billionaire's kind. Men who thrived on making others feel small, who built their confidence on the broken dignity of those around them. And she knew the best way to defeat them wasn't anger. It was composure. Because nothing unsettles a bully more than a target who doesn't flinch. Back at table 9, the billionaire laughed again, his voice carrying across the room. He didn't even lower it anymore. He thought he was untouchable, that nobody in the restaurant understood his words but his companions. And that was where he was wrong. Amina approached their table again, balancing a tray of appetizers. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Her hands no longer trembled. She had made her decision. She placed the plates down one by one, her movements precise. She didn't rush, didn't falter. She made eye contact with each man at the table, her polite smile unwavering. The billionaire raised an eyebrow, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. In Arabic, he muttered to his friend, "Look at her pretending to be graceful, like a peasant playing princess." The table burst into laughter again. But this time, Amina didn't walk away. She stood there for just a second longer, her tray still tucked under her arm. And then, slowly, she turned her gaze directly to the billionaire. For the first time that evening, she really looked at him, not as a server to a customer, not as the powerless to the powerful, but as equals. Her eyes were calm, steady, unshaken, and in that silence, something shifted. The silver-haired investor, sitting beside the billionaire, noticed it first. He leaned back in his chair, his laughter fading, his expression tightening as if he knew what was about to come. Amina inhaled softly. She could feel the moment crystallizing, every sound around her dimming, the piano fading, the conversations dulling, the clinking of glasses disappearing. It was just her and him now. Her mother's words echoed again in her mind. When you do answer, make sure they never forget it. And Amina knew her answer was coming, not in anger, not in a shout, not in broken English or in nervous stammers, but in flawless Arabic. She was ready. The billionaire didn't know it yet, but his performance was about to end, and hers was about to begin. The mockery begins. Amina set the last menu gently onto the polished oak table. She forced a polite smile, the kind that waiters perfect after years of swallowing disrespect. Inside, though her heart was racing, she could feel the billionaire's eyes flick toward her briefly, not with acknowledgement, but with the casual dismissal of someone looking at furniture. "Water for everyone," he muttered in English, finally glancing her way as if giving command to servant. Then, without waiting for her reply, he switched back to Arabic, leaning toward the man seated closest to him. "Do you see her posture?" he whispered, smirking. "Like she's carrying the weight of the world. Maybe she should be at a gym instead of here, dropping glasses." The table chuckled, muffled laughter that filled the corners of the restaurant like smoke. Amina froze for a fraction of a second. The words cut, not because they were true, but because of how freely they spilled from his mouth, as if mocking her was as natural as breathing. But she steadied her breath, lifted her chin, and walked away to fetch the drinks. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor, and with each step, she replayed his words in her mind, like she's carrying the weight of the world. He didn't know how right he was. She was carrying the weight of the world, her brother's education, their rent, their survival. But he didn't say it with sympathy. He said it as a weapon. At the bar counter, she poured water into crystal glasses. Her hands steady though her chest burned with anger. Around her, life in the restaurant continued as normal. Couples toasted anniversaries. Businessmen sealed deals over rare wine. The pianist's fingers danced gracefully over the keys. Nobody else knew the storm brewing inside her. When she returned to the table, tray balanced expertly, she heard another remark slip from the billionaire's mouth in Arabic. "Watch her hands. Any second now, she'll spill it. Then we'll have a free show." The laughter rose again, cruel and careless. This time, Amina's grip on the tray tightened. She wanted so badly to slam the glasses down, to let the water splash across his expensive suit. But she didn't. Instead, she moved with quiet precision, placing each glass carefully in front of the men, making sure not a single drop spilled. Her silence made them laugh harder. "Look at that," the billionaire chuckled. "She's concentrating like she's performing brain surgery. And it's just water." The words burned in Amina's ears, not because she hadn't heard such insult before, but because of what they revealed. How little he thought her, how invisible he believed she was. Her mind flashed back to the years she had spent learning Arabic, the late nights scribbling vocabulary lists, the mornings repeating phrases while stirring oatmeal for Jamal, the determination that had carried her through exhaustion. All of it had been a fight to prove, at least to herself, that she was capable of more. And here was this man, dismissing her in the very language she had fought tooth and nail to master. As she set the final glass on the table, she heard him whisper again in Arabic, "People like this don't belong in places like this. She should be grateful just to be standing here." That was it. Amina's chest tightened. For years, she had held her tongue, choosing silence over confrontation. But now, silence felt like surrender. She couldn't let this man reduce her existence to a joke. Not when she understood every poisonous word spilling from his mouth. She stood there for a moment, tray tucked under her arm, eyes fixed on the billionaire. He didn't notice. He was too busy laughing with his companions. But one of the investors at the table did notice. A man with silver hair and kind eyes glanced at Amina, his smile fading slightly as he studied her face. Perhaps he sensed the storm behind her calm expression. Perhaps he realized this wasn't just another waitress. They had underestimated her. Still, Amina said nothing. Not yet. She walked away from the table, her apron swaying at her side, and stood near the bar as though waiting for instructions. In reality, she was thinking, weighing her choices. If she spoke up, she risked everything. Her job, her livelihood, even her ability to provide for Jamal. But if she stayed silent, she would be betraying herself. The billionaire's laughter carried across the restaurant. His voice was loud, full of arrogance, making sure his audience, both at the table and beyond, heard his dominance. He loved being the center of attention. He loved reminding everyone that he was above them. But he was about to learn that money couldn't shield him from everything. Because while he saw Amina as a powerless waitress, she knew something he didn't. She knew that words, when used wisely, could be more powerful than wealth. She knew that dignity, once defended, could silence even the loudest laughter. And she knew Arabic. The restaurant glowed under golden chandeliers, but at that moment for Amina, it felt like a stage. The billionaire thought he was the only one performing, mocking her for his friend's amusement. But soon the spotlight would shift. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and turned toward table 9. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her steps were steady. Each one carried not just her, but the weight of every insult she had ever endured, every sacrifice she had ever made, every dream she still carried. The mockery had gone on long enough. It was time for the tables to turn. The billionaire's entrance. The clinking of silverware slowed. The soft murmur of conversation dulled. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to stumble on a note as the door swung open. That was the effect of his arrival. The billionaire. Everyone in that luxury restaurant knew his name. It wasn't just that he was rich. Dozens of wealthy people dined there every night. It was that his presence carried a reputation, power, influence, arrogance. He was a man whose signature could change stock markets, whose words could start or end careers, whose smile could charm a boardroom, but whose temper could destroy a person's livelihood in an instant. Dressed in a navy blue tailored suit that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle in its life, he strode in with the confidence of someone who believed the entire world bent to his will. On his wrist was a gold watch worth more than Amina's yearly salary. His shoes shined so brightly they reflected the chandeliers above, and every detail of his appearance screamed wealth, privilege, and untouchable status. Behind him trailed his entourage. 3 investors in equally expensive suits, a lawyer who carried himself stiffly, and 2 younger men who seemed more like sycophants than friends, laughing too hard at every minor joke. Their voices filled the space before they even sat down, and heads turned to watch them move across the polished floor like royalty entering a palace. Amina noticed how the other staff reacted immediately. Shoulders tightened. Smiles became sharper, almost rehearsed. Everyone knew that this customer was not just any customer. Serving him wasn't about food or drink. It was about survival. If you please him, you might earn a hefty tip, or at the very least, escape unscathed. If you failed, one complaint from him could send you packing. Unfortunately, fate chose Amina to serve his table. She didn't flinch, at least not outwardly. She adjusted her apron, steadied her breathing, and reminded herself of what she had told Jamal just that morning. We hold our heads high, no matter what. Still, as she grabbed menus and approached the group, she couldn't ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. She had seen this billionaire before. Never close up, always from a distance, but his reputation traveled faster than he did. Stories of him berating hotel staff, ridiculing waiters, even humiliating a young chef during an opening night had circulated among workers like cautionary tales. And now he was at her table. "Good evening, gentlemen," Amina said, her voice steady, professional. "Welcome. May I start you off with something to drink?" For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe maybe, just maybe, this night would be different. Maybe he would order politely, ignore her existence beyond her role, and she could move through the evening like a shadow. But then he spoke. He didn't look at her, not even once. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, draping an arm over the side like a king on his throne, and began speaking to his companions in Arabic. His voice was low, but not low enough. "Look at her hands," he sneered, his lips curling into a smirk. "Clumsy. She can barely hold the tray. People like this should be scrubbing floors, not touching my glass." His friends chuckled, their laughter muffled behind crystal glasses of champagne. The words stung, sharp and heavy, even though Amina had grown used to the sting of disrespect. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and looked down upon more times than she could count. But hearing in Arabic, hearing in a language she had fought so hard to master, hit different. It wasn't just an insult. It was arrogance layered with ignorance, because he thought she couldn't understand him. To the billionaire, Arabic was a secret weapon, a way to mock without consequence, to laugh without fear of being caught. To Amina, it was a challenge. And at that moment, she realized something. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm. She placed the menus in front of him and his companions, her movements deliberate, graceful. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Inside her mind, 2 voices battled. One said, "Stay quiet. Protect your job. Don't risk everything." The other whispered, "Stand up. Show him. Prove you're more than what he thinks." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray, but she quickly steadied herself. Years of carrying heavy plates had given her balance, not just in her body, but in her spirit. The billionaire, oblivious, continued. He made more remarks about her appearance, her supposed incompetence, even mocking the way she set down a glass of water. Each word dripped with disdain, each chuckle from his table pressing heavier on her chest. But Amina didn't falter. She had survived far worse than this man's laughter. She had survived nights of hunger, years of grief, endless hours of work. She wasn't about to let him break her now. Still, the question lingered. Should she reveal her secret? Should she respond in the language he thought belonged only to him and his circle? Should she turn the mirror around and let him see himself through her eyes? She remembered the jar at home, labeled College Dreams. She remembered Jamal's voice telling her, "One day, you'll be more than a waitress." And she remembered every insult she had ever swallowed in silence. Every time she had bowed her head just to keep her job. No, not this time. This time, she wasn't going to stay invisible. The billionaire laughed again, raising his glass, completely unaware that the young woman standing before him was about to flip the script. Amina adjusted her apron, straightened her back, and made her decision. The restaurant still saw her as a simple waitress. But in the next few moments, they would witness something unforgettable. The billionaire's entrance. The clinking of silverware slowed. The soft murmur of conversation dulled. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to stumble on a note as the door swung open. That was the effect of his arrival. The billionaire. Everyone in that luxury restaurant knew his name. It wasn't just that he was rich. Dozens of wealthy people dined there every night. It was that his presence carried a reputation, power, influence, arrogance. He was a man whose signature could change stock markets, whose words could start or end careers, whose smile could charm a boardroom, but whose temper could destroy a person's livelihood in an instant. Dressed in a navy blue tailored suit that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle in its life, he strode in with the confidence of someone who believed the entire world bent to his will. On his wrist was a gold watch worth more than Amina's yearly salary. His shoes shined so brightly they reflected the chandeliers above, and every detail of his appearance screamed wealth, privilege, and untouchable status. Behind him trailed his entourage. 3 investors in equally expensive suits, a lawyer who carried himself stiffly, and 2 younger men who seemed more like sycophants than friends, laughing too hard at every minor joke. Their voices filled the space before they even sat down, and heads turned to watch them move across the polished floor like royalty entering a palace. Amina noticed how the other staff reacted immediately. Shoulders tightened. Smiles became sharper, almost rehearsed. Everyone knew that this customer was not just any customer. Serving him wasn't about food or drink. It was about survival. If you please him, you might earn a hefty tip, or at the very least, escape unscathed. If you failed, one complaint from him could send you packing. Unfortunately, fate chose Amina to serve his table. She didn't flinch, at least not outwardly. She adjusted her apron, steadied her breathing, and reminded herself of what she had told Jamal just that morning. We hold our heads high, no matter what. Still, as she grabbed menus and approached the group, she couldn't ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. She had seen this billionaire before. Never close up, always from a distance, but his reputation traveled faster than he did. Stories of him berating hotel staff, ridiculing waiters, even humiliating a young chef during an opening night had circulated among workers like cautionary tales. And now he was at her table. "Good evening, gentlemen," Amina said, her voice steady, professional. "Welcome. May I start you off with something to drink?" For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe maybe, just maybe, this night would be different. Maybe he would order politely, ignore her existence beyond her role, and she could move through the evening like a shadow. But then he spoke. He didn't look at her, not even once. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, draping an arm over the side like a king on his throne, and began speaking to his companions in Arabic. His voice was low, but not low enough. "Look at her hands," he sneered, his lips curling into a smirk. "Clumsy. She can barely hold the tray. People like this should be scrubbing floors, not touching my glass." His friends chuckled, their laughter muffled behind crystal glasses of champagne. The words stung, sharp and heavy, even though Amina had grown used to the sting of disrespect. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and looked down upon more times than she could count. But hearing in Arabic, hearing in a language she had fought so hard to master, hit different. It wasn't just an insult. It was arrogance layered with ignorance, because he thought she couldn't understand him. To the billionaire, Arabic was a secret weapon, a way to mock without consequence, to laugh without fear of being caught. To Amina, it was a challenge. And at that moment, she realized something. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm. She placed the menus in front of him and his companions, her movements deliberate, graceful. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Inside her mind, two voices battled. One said, "Stay quiet. Protect your job. Don't risk everything." The other whispered, "Stand up. Show him. Prove you're more than what he thinks." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray, but she quickly steadied herself. Years of carrying heavy plates had given her balance, not just in her body, but in her spirit. The billionaire, oblivious, continued. He made more remarks about her appearance, her supposed incompetence, even mocking the way she set down a glass of water. Each word dripped with disdain, each chuckle from his table pressing heavier on her chest. But Amina didn't falter. She had survived far worse than this man's laughter. She had survived nights of hunger, years of grief, endless hours of work. She wasn't about to let him break her now. Still, the question lingered. Should she reveal her secret? Should she respond in the language he thought belonged only to him and his circle? Should she turn the mirror around and let him see himself through her eyes? She remembered the jar at home, labeled College Dreams. She remembered Jamal's voice telling her, "One day, you'll be more than a waitress." And she remembered every insult she had ever swallowed in silence. Every time she had bowed her head just to keep her job. No, not this time. This time, she wasn't going to stay invisible. The billionaire laughed again, raising his glass, completely unaware that the young woman standing before him was about to flip the script. Amina adjusted her apron, straightened her back, and made her decision. The restaurant still saw her as a simple waitress. But in the next few moments, they would witness something unforgettable. The waitress. Her name was Amina. To the rich customers who dined in that luxury restaurant, she was just another server in a black apron. Someone who poured their wine, smiled politely, and disappeared into the background. But behind that apron was a story, one that nobody at that table could ever imagine. Amina was only 24, yet her life had already been filled with battles. She had grown up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, where opportunities were scarce and survival was a daily challenge. Her parents, hard-working but poor, had always told her that education was the key to a better life. But when tragedy struck and they both passed away suddenly in a car accident, Amina's entire world flipped upside down. She was barely 19 when she became the sole guardian of her 12-year-old brother, Jamal. Overnight, she had to grow up. Bills didn't wait for her grief, and rent didn't pause for her tears. She found herself working double shifts at diners, hotels, and finally, this upscale restaurant, just to keep a roof over their heads. Every morning before work, she made breakfast for Jamal, helped with homework, and reminded him to dream bigger than their circumstances. And every night, no matter how tired she was, she stayed up studying. Because while most people saw her as just a waitress, she saw herself as something more, a fighter, a learner, a woman chasing knowledge like her life depended on it. And in many ways, it did. You see, Amina had an obsession. Languages. It started when she was little. Her father worked at the airport as a cleaner, and he would often come home with stories of travelers speaking in tongues she couldn't understand. French, Spanish, Chinese. He would mimic the sounds, and Amina would laugh, then try to repeat them. What began as a game turned into a passion. She wanted to understand people from every corner of the world. After her parents' death, that passion became her escape. While Jamal slept, Amina buried herself in secondhand books, YouTube tutorials, and free language apps. She picked up Spanish first, then French. She challenged herself with Mandarin and surprised herself by how quickly she grasped it. Arabic, though, that was a language that nearly broke her. She remembered nights sitting by the dim kitchen light, repeating phrases over and over until her tongue felt twisted. She remembered writing down verbs and vocabulary on scraps of paper she carried in her apron pocket, sneaking glances at them during breaks. There were times she wanted to give up, times she thought, "This is too hard. I'm just a waitress. What's the point?" But then she'd look at Jamal sleeping peacefully, and she remembered the jar on the counter, the one labeled College Dreams. And she kept going. After years of practice, her hard work paid off. She wasn't just conversational in Arabic. She was fluent. She could understand jokes, sarcasm, even the subtle tones people thought only native speakers would catch. And yet, nobody at the restaurant knew. Not her co-workers, not her manager, and certainly not the arrogant billionaire who now sat at her table. To them, she was invisible. But Amina had learned to wear invisibility like armor. She knew the power of silence, the strength of patience. People underestimated her every day, and she let them because she understood something they didn't. She knew that true strength wasn't about showing off. It was about knowing who you were, even when the world didn't. That night, as she moved from table to table, she noticed how different customers treated her. Some said thank you, looked her in the eye, and recognized her humanity. Others acted as if she were nothing more than part of the furniture. She had learned to swallow her pride, to let disrespect roll off her shoulders like water. But deep down, she carried every word, every glance, every insult. And when the billionaire mocked her, it wasn't the first time someone had tried to make her feel small, but it was the first time he made a critical mistake. He mocked her in a language she had mastered. To him, Arabic was a private code, a shield behind which he could laugh at her without consequence. To Amina, it was an opportunity, a chance to remind not only him but herself that she was not powerless. Still, she hesitated. She knew the risks. Speaking up could mean losing her job. Her manager wasn't forgiving type, and billionaires had influence far beyond one restaurant. But staying silent would mean allowing another person to trample her dignity, and that was a price she was no longer willing to pay. As she balanced her tray and moved carefully between tables, she thought about everything that had brought her here. The nights of studying until her eyes burned, the sacrifices she made for Jamal, the dreams she carried for a better future. She wasn't going to let one arrogant man reduce all of that to nothing. The pianist in the corner played a soft tune, unaware of the storm brewing at table 9. Guests nearby sipped wine, chatted about vacations, and closed business deals worth millions. To them, Amina was just another shadow moving through the golden light of the chandeliers. But in her mind, the spotlight was already shifting, because Amina knew something they didn't. The billionaire thought she was a poor, uneducated girl who couldn't possibly understand him. But the truth? She was about to surprise him in a way he would never forget. She adjusted her apron, steadied her breathing, and prepared herself for the moment that would change everything. The restaurant saw only a waitress. But soon they would see who Amina really was.